Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Welcome to the session on the alternative payments predicament to accept or not accept. My name is Jane Lee, and I'm a trust and safety architect at SIFT. Basically, you could think of me and my team as the in-house subject matter experts on all things fraud related. Prior to joining SIFT, I spent a little over 5 years at Facebook working on spam detection and enforcement. And then before that, spent some time at Square working on chargebacks and payments risk. To give you a loose overview of what we'll go over in this session, we'll start off by talking about some trends in the alternative payment space, specifically referring to buy now, pay later and crypto. We'll also cover some fraud risks associated with each of those alternative payments, and then close out the session today with strategy. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them, so please do drop them in the chat and we will get to them. So to be or not to be, that is the question. And to be completely transparent, I can't tell you that at this very moment. What my role and my objective here is to lay out basically all the risks, kind of clarify some of the misconceptions that I have heard within the space, and then hopefully allow you and your teams to make an informed decision on what's best for you. So buy now, pay later has exploded, I would say, even in the past year, year and a half. I remember when it first came onto the scene here in the US, where I am based, we didn't really see it as commonly as it is today. I feel like at this point, you basically can buy now, pay later for everything. It's almost on every single major online platform that I make purchases from. However, there's a big question mark associated with this. So on the left, you see a news highlight mentioning the prevalence of buy now, pay later just about everywhere. But over on the right side, you see a screenshot of what my team has uncovered from a Telegram forum. Basically, this is a fraudster offering their services, allowing their customers, the fraudster's customers, to circumvent a lot of these buy now, pay later processes. Just to add a little more about what I do, my team and I, we also kind of lurk in the dark web and deep web forums to understand the chatter and what's going on. And so this is something, as we do see trends evolve in the benign, legitimate space, we also see a parallel evolution in the fraud space as well. And so pointing out just a headline that one of my teammates, Brittany Allen, took part in, buy now, pay later scammers are sharing their exploits and secrets on Telegram. And so here you see some segments from this piece highlighted, highlighting a very specific type of scam that we're seeing impacting the buy now, pay later space. And so the way that these bad actors are exploiting the system is either by compromising buy now, pay later accounts or using a combination of stolen credentials or synthetic identities to create buy now, pay later accounts that have passed all your typical fraud checks. This particular scheme in particular, I think a lot of people assume that buy now, pay later is safe. One, because there is a lot of multi-factor authentication that is happening when there is a new login. This particular scheme exploited the multi-factor authentication process. And so you can think of these bad actors as constantly stress testing systems to find any loopholes that they can exploit. So I always try, whenever there's a new product offering or a new type of service on the market, I always like to kind of walk through that process myself and try to see where I can see risk seeping through. And so I went through the buy now, pay later process, and this is what I saw. This was a checkout for some clothing that I was trying to buy. And as you can see, all the way at the bottom, I elected to use the buy now, pay later option, which then took me to a profile creation process. And so this happens on the buy now, pay later providers platform. Filled in my information, and then spoiler alert, I actually got declined. So this is another point that I like to highlight with merchants that I do speak with. make sure that you have a very good relationship with your account management team if you are using a buy now pay later profile, because uh, maybe this is a little TMI here, but I do have good credit. I am a reputable purchaser, or someone that is trustworthy when it comes to lending, and ultimately I did get declined. I tried this with pretty much every major buy now pay later provider available, not just on this platform that I use, and I was declined by all of them. And so you want to make sure that your false positive rate is in a good place when you're deciding to partner with any of these providers as well. Similarly, I tested out the crypto user flow. So this is a situation in which you, as a purchaser, are trying to use crypto as a currency, basically as a form of payment when you are checking out. And so, very similarly here, I elected the option of paying with Bitcoin, which then took me to this window here where it asked me to remit funds to this particular address, confirm that I did such, and then received an order confirmation as the final step. So I actually, during this process, did not actually send payment to this wallet address that you see in the middle here, which, if you can imagine, left me feeling an immense amount of guilt when I realized I said I sent money and I didn't, and then I got an order confirmation. I was contemplating what I would do to reach out to Overstock here and tell them that I actually didn't pay for this. Luckily, a few days down the road, I did get a order cancellation notice from this merchant. So that's another thing when you are working with a a platform that processes crypto payments for you. Make sure you have that seamless communication between the provider as well as your payments infra as well. So I want to take a step back and talk about traditional payments risk. This is your typical, either cash or credit card purchases that are made online. If I wanted to simplify where I think the risk lies when it comes to traditional payments, you have at the beginning, you have an account creation. So you have the potential of dealing with a fake account. Then the risk becomes the risk at fake account creation is the bad actor behind the scenes can either be using a stolen payment uh, profile, or again, this synthetic type of identity that we talked about earlier. But say you did have a real user creating a real account. Um, the next risk then lies in the login. So you could have a legitimate user meaning to do well on your platform, but they have the ATO or account takeover risk that happens at any point that isn't always in the merchant's control. As we know, a lot of the ATO and phishing happens off platform, but can always show up at your front step. And then lastly, you have at the point of payment, again, you can have a stolen payment account. You can have, when it comes to account takeovers, what we're seeing a lot more now is card testing happening on ATO'd accounts. And so the reason why bad actors have chosen this route is because a lot of systems have basically rules in place where if a user is more reputable, or if a user has been on your platform for, let's say, 3 years, let's allow them to pass some of the typical early stage fraud checks that we do have. Bad actors, of course, know this, so therefore they're attacking the aged, more reputable accounts. But when we look at the alternative payments risk, the problem becomes at least twofold. So you see the first two steps, very similar to the traditional payments risk, where you have a potential fake account, and then you have the login risk. But when you think about alternative payments, not only do these risks lie within your platform as a merchant, so say if you are Nordstrom, someone's Nordstrom account can get compromised at any time. You also have the risks coming in from your processor's end. So think of whatever buy now, pay later service that you might be partnering with. There is also ATO and fake account coming through from those avenues as well. And so again, the scope of the problem in which fraud teams are dealing with becomes larger. And what we are seeing is a lot of these teams are still acting in silos, right? And so it's very um, rare to see that seamless communication happening between the merchant end and the buy now pay later provider end or the crypto processor end. And so what we do see as an unfortunate consequence is one, the false positive rates spiking, two, a lot of fraud still getting through. But wait, there's more. So what I did, I was actually denied from these buy now pay later providers. Luckily, I have some friends I was able to tap into that made a friend that made a Peloton purchase, and so I think Peloton here in the U.S. was one of the first. I would say major. I think they were responsible for a lot of people adopting this buy now, pay later option. I have a handful of friends that used that to make Peloton purchases at the start of the pandemic. But um, the reason why I like to highlight these three screenshots you see here are this is what you see, or this is what one sees when you are approved for a buy now pay later service. And so this is on one of the major platforms. As you can see, if this information got into the wrong hands, or if the wrong person got access to a legitimate account, they essentially have a treasure trove of information. And all of these items you see here are relatively high value, or they have a high resale value. So you see AirPods, you see Peloton, you see a Roomba. And so basically this gives these fraudsters all of the information they need, basically gives them a map of where they can then go to commit fraud. Last thing you want is for these bad actors to have your business's name kind of cycling through their communities, because as we've seen, if there is one loophole that they know to exploit, they will continuously exploit that until you stop that gap. So this is a phrase that I think becomes very important, and this was coined by one of my teammates. I can't claim this myself, but the question is, are you verifying the identity or an identity? And this came up earlier a few slides ago when we talked about synthetic identity or stolen identities. And basically what we're seeing now is bad actors, these cyber criminals, using a combination of different types of PII to either create a full profile or parts of a full profile that would pass these one-dimensional identity checks. And so here, both on the left and right screenshots, you see full profiles being sold. On the right side, you see fulls highlighted. These again are just full identity profiles. I always like to plug in this podcast that I think is really interesting and highlights just how much information these nefarious actors have. It's a podcast from Reply All, and the episode is called Snapchat Thief. And the reporter basically gets in touch with a hacker, and the hacker challenges the reporter, who's a tech reporter and considers themselves to be rather tech savvy and security focused. He challenges the reporter and asks him, "Hey, give me your first and last name, and like one other signal, and I can figure out all this information on you." And so the reporter provides just very high level information on his name, and I think maybe it was his address. And this person was able to pull up all of this really granular security information, and that really for me just highlighted just how much information that these people do have and can leverage to commit really sophisticated types of fraud. One of the things that I get asked all the time is how has fraud changed, and it's becoming a lot more complicated because you have issues like this where sure, you might be verifying Jane Lee is a person, but is the person creating the profile on your platform, is that in fact Jane Lee, or is it someone impersonating Jane Lee? And so again, this becomes all the more challenging for fraud teams to really be able to discern. As mentioned, we do a lot of deep web, dark web lookups on my team just to really understand what's going on in the fraud environment. Here you see a bunch of PII type of information offered. And I want to focus your attention on the middle screenshots here. So the second screenshot you see, this was especially prevalent during tax season, which just closed a couple months ago here in the US. But basically, these people were hijacking people's tax refunds. And I actually have a friend of friends that tried to file their tax return here in the US, and was told that it had already been filed. And so this is very real. It does happen, probably closer within your network than you would think if you were to ask. The third screenshot here is a sample of what this particular bad actor is offering. As you can see, they have first name, last name, address, things even down to your social security number, which here in the US is equivalent to, it's a national identifier number. So it really, goes to show again how much information they have. Another very common question that we get when we do present this type of content is, how do you know that that this information is actually valid? And we'll get more into this in a few slides. So this stresses kind of why we need to work together. So what you're looking at here are highlights from early on this year, and these all came from early 2022 on major data breaches. And I feel like data breaches are one of those things that I feel like I'm hearing about major ones. I want to say monthly, but possibly even weekly, on a weekly basis, that we're hearing of ones that are disclosed to us as the public. When you factor in the fact that 65% of users recycle their credentials on different platforms, you can quickly understand that each of these data breaches are not isolated. It actually becomes a global type of network problem. T-Mobile, I hate to pick on them, but T-Mobile is a common merchant that we hear about often in the news with data breaches. So if you think of, back to this metric, 65% of T-Mobile users have used their username and password or some combination of the two elsewhere. This sounds dramatic, but I think it is very accurate, and it's a sobering fact. Is you can imagine that 65% of your users are already compromised because they have been compromised elsewhere. And so again, it's not a matter of if your users have been compromised, it's a matter, and this could have happened elsewhere, not necessarily related to you and your platform and your security, but they have been compromised elsewhere. So we want to make sure that we are prepared once that shows up at our front door. So I want to take a step back a little bit and talk a little bit about what we call the fraud economy. And so I mentioned a few slides ago the question of, how do you know that that this information sold on illicit marketplaces, how do you know that they are actually valid? How do we know that these fraudsters aren't just defrauding fraudsters? So we talk a little bit about the fraud economy, and this is how we basically think about it, what you see on this visual here. But to simplify the definition, the fraud economy is essentially a interconnected network of cyber criminals that basically serve as a means to an end. And so you can think about the fraud economy as very parallel to traditional economics. You have different types of skilled labor. You have people that do more tech savvy types of compromises or data breaches. You have people on the ground kind of stealing devices and such. They also operate in their own type of marketplaces. Again, they're illegal, but they do buy and sell their services. They do trade. We do see kind of the rules of supply and demand also apply to their marketplaces. So if something is of high value but in less quantity, those go for a higher price. So I think it's very interesting how it does mirror the way that legitimate economies do operate. Again, of course, this is all just malicious, so that's the kicker to this. But you could think of it as a collaborative environment in which these bad actors are buying and selling goods and services to other folks that are willing to commit fraud. So this is another slide that shows the types of information that we do see on Telegram. Over on the left, this is particularly specifically for buy now, pay later. You see this person advertising different types of buy now, pay later offerings that they have. The second slide that you see here, this calls out yahoo.com and AOL.com email addresses. I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there was a particular exploit that targeted multi-factor authentication, and this was specifically on Yahoo and Yahoo and AOL email domains or email addresses. And so, again, they're stress testing your system. Usually, this shows up as a series of failed logins. If you were able to see that within your platform. On the third screenshot, you see this person that has access to a virtual card that was provided by a buy now, pay later service. It shows the value that is held on the card. And then all the way on the right side, you see a screenshot that was shown earlier on in the presentation. Again, this is just a full comprehensive list of all the people, all the merchants that they know their buy now, pay later exploit works on. What we do also see within these forums is again, if you have a case in which a scammer scams a scammer, so someone is not good for their word or sells illegitimate, I guess illegitimate's not the right word, but when someone sells information that does not basically yield anything that they're promising, you see them shunned by their community. So this is a tight-knit community. They work together. You're basically ostracized if you're not good for your word. And so we do see that happen occasionally as well, in which someone leaves a review for someone that they made a purchase from. Now, moving on to what this all means for you. What is the cost of this to you as a merchant? And so, of course, with ATO and loss of payment, we all know that eventually results in the chargeback. However, there is not just the financial loss that I would say. I really do try to advocate for businesses and merchants to start thinking about negative PR and brand reputation. A good example of brand reputation is, let's think again in the traditional payment risk flow. So say I am a reputable user that makes a purchase on Target. Actually, let's backtrack that. Say I'm a well-meaning user, but I have never, and this is a lie, I have never made a purchase on Target at all in my life. Then all of a sudden, I see a fraudulent transaction on my credit card statement that says I spent $1,000 at Target. To me, as a user that is not yet a customer, that memory is basically imprinted forever that Target ran a fraudulent charge on my bank or on my account. And so that type of reputation, one, not only is hard to quantify the damages from, but it's really, really hard to bounce back from. And so, having worked at Facebook, who has gone through their fair share of bad PR and such, it becomes really hard to bounce back from that type of reputation. And so I really encourage you to get ahead of it. I think what we see, unfortunately, is a lot of teams acting reactively to fraud, and we really encourage folks to be proactive and get ahead of it. Again, it's not a matter of if you have fraud, it's a matter of when it's going to really strike. And then, just quickly going through, not to mention the legal compliance and ops, so the staffing, the overhead costs associated with managing your fraud. That's another cost that I think when you're just thinking about it from the chargeback fraud loss perspective, we don't really think as naturally about the overhead costs, but that does add up, especially if you're a team that's already bleeding. Another common response that I get from merchants we do speak with that are partnering either with a crypto processing platform or a buy now, pay later platform is your processor does absorb a lot of the costs. So yes, that is a fact now. But again, if your processor sees that you are sending over a lot of traffic or a lot of payments over from compromised accounts, I can only imagine that it's a matter of time before you are held liable. It's not like you're going to have coverage infinitely forever. And so I do encourage, I don't see that coverage um, being as let's see, as liberal as it currently is. And again, back to the fraud economy and the forums that these people are communicating in, you really don't want your brand's name cycling through these communities, because once they do realize that you are an easy target, they're going to continue targeting from all angles, not just the alternative payments angle, but from all the various types of fraud angles possible. So moving on to why technology is important. So here you see a highlight from earlier this year, talking about credential stuffing. And credential stuffing is actually a problem. I speak with lots of customers and prospects on the regular. Credential stuffing is so common. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in or what industry you're in or what type of service you offer. It's kind of agnostic of all of those. It's vertical agnostic. And so for those of you that might not be as familiar, credential stuffing is essentially when these bad actors have um, a database of username password combination, and they're just using scripts or automated scripts to basically test tens of thousands of credentials against your platform to validate which ones stick. And so you can imagine that this is why, the bad actors, the fraudsters, are using technology. And so it only really makes sense that we're also matching that energy and using technology and leveraging the right technology as well, which takes us to machine learning. I mentioned earlier that a lot of, I think, more archaic rules-based systems have certain rules in place. For example, the age of an account. So if Jane Lee's account is over 3 years old, let's let Jane, bypass a lot of the early rules that we have. But again, if you have fraudsters that know of this, they can easily kind of circumvent those types of checks, which is where machine learning has that advantage. Machine learning not only allows you to basically take a lot of complex behavioral signals that you do have that are also passive to what you do, what information that you as a business do have. A lot of companies, as they've gone digital, there's so much passive information there. It's just a matter of what you're doing with it. What type of analytics are you running on that type of data? And so that's what machine learning essentially does. It takes these tens of thousands of signals, puts them into the engine, and then spits out a risk assessment. This is one way to do it. At SIFT, we do share a score that ranges from 0 to 100, 0 being least risky, 100 being the most risky. And we'll kind of dissect the types of things that we're looking at when we're saying that something is risky. And so what we do is deep signal analysis. This is actually not unique to SIFT. This is what machine learning does. Again, it takes, maybe a traditional rule system would just look at a bad email address or a bad email domain. But what happens when bad email at spam.com becomes bad email 1 at spam.com, bad email 2 at spam.com? We see this type of scripted or automated activity in which these malicious actors are quickly circumventing. So even if you were to block all of these unique email addresses, or even block spam.com, the entire email domain, they'll quickly figure out how to find something else. So we don't want to take a one-dimensional approach when it comes to fighting these very tech-savvy fraudsters. And so this is an example of what we do. So here you see Blue Sky Jumper 1487 at yotmail.com. Yotmail.com, for those of us in the fraud space, we know is a very fraudy email domain. It's not always fraud, but it is a disposable email domain, meaning that it is very easy for fraudsters to use it. You could use it to register, get a verification email one time, and then never use that email address again. So you don't want to just look at yotmail.com. You want to look at what the email address looks like before that, or the email name looks like. And so here we have an example of a analysis on what that name looks like. Does it make sense for the consonants and vowels and numbers to add up? As we have all seen, a lot of the scripted email addresses kind of look like gibberish. Again, of course, those are scripted, they don't make any sense. So that could be interpreted as more risky if you were to look at a combination of signals. And then we want to look at what they're doing across the user journey with that email address. And so say they elect to use next day shipping. That could be seen as more riskier because it is a quicker means for the fraudsters to obtain the goods that they're obtaining illegitimately. And then all the way down on the right side of the screen, you see a PO box. That again is a little more risky because it's not tied to an actual physical address, which we do see pretty often used by fraudsters. I just covered just a few of the many different types of signals that we are analyzing. Here you see a few other things like device fingerprint, velocity, social data. I think one of the most interesting things that I have heard of being used in the analysis is whether a phone is plugged into a charger or not. In some situations, that can be seen as risky. I think we've all seen that one meme where you have 100 phones kind of just along a wall and people are paid to go and tap, and that's for fake engagement, for click engagement. And so in certain situations that can be seen as risky because normal users do not have their phones plugged in 24/7. And so closing out, we want to talk about dynamic friction. So you have all this data, you have different risks at different points of the user journey. How can you leverage that in a way that makes sense for your business? So an example of a way you can use the data to apply the right amount of friction is, say you have this user here that creates an account, and then maybe right off the bat they have a failed login. It could be a case of fat fingers, or maybe they quickly forgot. But then immediately after, they successfully log in and they begin browsing. And so if you can see here, again, if you think in terms of the SIFT score we talked about, you see the score kind of teetering from a 5 to a 25 to 15. So maybe at the first failure, you bump that up to a higher risk category, but once they are able to successfully log in and browse, then you bump that maybe back down to a 15 or something that's more comfortable. This isn't something that you as a business is doing. This is something that the machine learning is kind of doing on the background. Of course, browsing is more indicative of benign users or real user activity. A lot of times with these fraudulent types of behavior, we don't see normal types of browsing patterns. But let's say somewhere, within this same login session, you see a new IP login. This is within a very short period of time. This user is logging in, let's say from, I hate to call out a specific country, but let's say they're logging in from overseas within the same window of time. Of course, normally users do not do this, and so you might want to bump that up to a risk score of 75. Which starts entering in that really risky category. And then let's say immediately after that, they update their password, in which case is usually indicative of ATO, I think, usually when you have those two paired so closely together. So you bump that up to an 85. What you could then do as a merchant is decide to either block the user outright. You could choose to put them into different types of friction. You could 3DS, you could send a notification to their email saying there was a suspicious login. You can prompt them to update their password again. Or I would not do this in this particular flow, but you can choose to offer an alternative payments risk, alternative payment format. And so the buy now, pay later crypto payment. You do not, nor should you offer this to everyone. I would encourage everyone to kind of do their due diligence and really do it to your least risky users. And so for some final takeaways, first of all, fraud follows funds. And so if you have a new trend or something that's new hot on the market, you can guarantee that the fraud will follow. Secondly, we have to work together as a community to protect the integrity of payments. Again, the fraudsters are working together. The fraud economy is a real thing. So it really only makes sense for us to do the same as well. Lastly, adopting the right technology is key. And so again, the fraudsters are using technology to defraud your system. So it really only makes sense for us to do the same. And that is all in terms of the content that I do have to share with you all today. Thank you so much for joining. And again, please do leave any questions that you do have in the chat box, and we will get to them sometime in the future.
Thank you there to speakers from Swift, Meta, and LexisNexis. Up next, in 5 minutes, we hear about demarcation of buy now, pay later from Arvato, and we also have the bots panel option, moderated by MRC and with human security, risk applied, F5, and Finish Line.